staying with relatives since being forced from their home. She told NJTV she was happy to finally be home.
I went and checked in on every one of my kids, and they were sound asleep. All comfy, cozy in beds. I love it.
Both families said they had to fight with insurers and endure long delays with New Jersey's Maid Rebuilding Grant Program. The fundraising campaign brought in $240,000 in cash, materials, and labor, some of it from individuals as far away as Texas and California. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo and Missouri Governor Jay Nixon have made a friendly wager over the 2015 World Series matchup between the Mets and the Kansas City Royals. If the Mets win, Nixon will wear a Mets jersey to work for a full day. If the Royals win, Cuomo will do the same, wearing a Royals jersey. The bet also includes each governor sending to the other various home state crafted food and spirits, including Kansas City ribs and hot Italian sausage from Central New York. Game 1 is tomorrow in Kansas City. You're listening to WNYC at 7:35.
Support for NPR comes from member stations and from Sony Pictures Classics, presenting Truth about the controversy surrounding Dan Rather and CBS after their report on George W. Bush's National Guard service, starring Cate Blanchett and Robert Redford, now playing. And Dropbox, providing Dropbox for business with added administrative features and security controls designed specifically for business, enabling people to work together on any file from anywhere. Learn more at dropbox.com/business.
From NPR News, this is All Things Considered. I'm Robert Siegel.
And I'm Ari Shapiro. Here's a way to think about the U.S. debt ceiling. In just over a week, the federal government may have to cut up its credit card. Treasury Secretary Jack Lew warns that the government has nearly exhausted its borrowing authority. And unless Congress acts, the government won't be able to borrow additional money after next Tuesday. Aides say members of Congress are closing in on a budget deal which would include a debt limit increase. NPR's Scott Horsley reports.
The Treasury Secretary made his latest appeal to lawmakers today in an op-ed column for USA Today. Without a hike in the debt ceiling, he warns, the government won't be able to pay the bills it's already run up, including military salaries, veterans benefits, and Social Security checks. Lew told CNBC even toying with such a possibility is dangerous.
Anytime you wait till the last possible minute, you're inviting a risk. And this is not a last minute that we can know with absolute certainty. I worry every time we hit this that sometime there could be an accident, and that would be terrible.
Lew's already been forced to move up the deadline more than once, thanks to lower than expected tax revenues and higher than expected expenses. He says that kind of volatility would be especially problematic if the government suddenly had to live with only the cash it has on hand.
Think about it. We have a government of the United States, a $4 trillion a year enterprise, where swings of a few $1 billion can determine whether or not you have enough cash to pay your bills. It's ridiculous.
Even if lawmakers don't raise the debt limit by next Tuesday, the government probably wouldn't default right away. Forecasters estimate there would still be around $30 billion in federal coffers. That's probably enough to make payroll for federal workers a week from Friday, and maybe enough to cut Social Security checks on November the 10th, though it's hard to know for sure.
I always like to say this is really more of an art than a science.
Shai Kavis of the Bipartisan Policy Center says the real test could come November 16th, when the government is supposed to make some $30 billion in interest payments. He predicts if the debt ceiling is not increased, the government will run out of cash somewhere between November 10th and 19th. He says pinpointing that moment is not easy.
These are billions of payments that are going out every single day. So this is really quite some treasury to be managing in a situation where they're in uncharted water and unable to borrow from the public.
The Moody's credit rating agency issued a report today saying even if Congress fails to raise the debt limit, the government would likely continue to pay interest on its debt, while postponing other payments such as federal workers' salaries. The administration has repeatedly dismissed that idea, and Akava says it understates the risk in lost confidence and higher borrowing costs. So what really happens on the day the government doesn't have the money it needs to pay all of its bills?
That's a great question, and the true answer is that we don't know, because we really never encountered that in modern America.
Treasury Secretary Lew hopes this is not the year we find out. Scott Horsley, NPR News, the White House.
Supreme Court justices are, for the most part, robed and mysterious figures. You don't see their faces on T-shirts, or painted on fingernails, or picked for tattoos. They're not routinely parodied on Saturday Night Live or Scandal. Well, at least not until Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg became a cultural icon around the same time she turned 80. Much of this is because of a Tumblr called the Notorious RBG, and now it's been transformed into a graphic non-fiction book that's out tomorrow. NPR Legal Affairs correspondent Nina Totenberg reports.
Like any Tumblr, the Notorious RBG allows people to post pretty much anything and do it anonymously. And so it was that Shauna Konishnik, enraged by a Supreme Court ruling gutting the Voting Rights Act, created a tribute Tumblr for the equally furious dissenter in that case, Justice Ginsburg. Hashtag the Notorious RBG soon took off like a bobsled on ice, and Ginsburg heard about the Tumblr.
I think a law clerk told me about this Tumblr and also explained to me what Notorious RBG was a parody on. And my grandchildren love it. and I try to keep abreast of the latest that's on the Tumblr.
The Tumblr, hashtag Notorious RBG, is a reference to the late 300-pound rapper Notorious B.I.G., known as Biggie, whose lyrics are so raunchy that it's hard to find an arable line.
Now I'm in the limelight 'cause I run tight.
The humor is in the contrast. It's this 80-something-year-old woman, small Jewish grandmother, contrasted to this larger-than-life persona that was Notorious B.I.G. They have something in common in that they're both from Brooklyn, and also I think they both speak truth to power and can pack a verbal punch.
Shauna Konishnik created the Notorious RBG Tumblr when she was still a law student at NYU. Now, she and Irene Carmon, an MSNBC reporter, have written a graphic nonfiction book about the iconic rise of RBG, who she is, how she got to the Supreme Court, and why young women want to be like her. Irene Carmon.
I don't think the iconic status that she's achieved could happen without social media at all. Because I think the internet has given young women an opportunity to choose our own heroes. The hero that so many young women chose was this 82-year-old grandmother. And I think part of that is because there's this desire on the internet to find something that feels authentic and real and raw.
What Carmon and Konishnik learned in working on their book is that Justice Ginsburg's life embodies way more than they knew. They knew she'd been the architect of the legal fight for women's equal rights in the 1960s and 70s. They didn't know that when she entered Harvard Law School, the dean told her she was taking the place of a man. They didn't know that she already had a daughter back then, that her husband was battling cancer, and that she moved with him to New York, where she graduated first in her class from Columbia Law School and was recommended for a Supreme Court clerkship. But, being a woman, she wasn't even interviewed. It was so difficult in those days for a woman to get a professional job that she hid her pregnancy while a professor at Rutgers. She didn't want to screw up her chances of getting tenure. The book has lots of these stories, tons of photos, drawings, a selection of annotated RBG opinions, dissents, doodles, and the Notorious RBG workout. Yes, her workout, which, as Irene observes, includes 20 push-ups.
Every time I tell somebody that she can do 20 push-ups, no one believes me. But we fact-checked it.
Indeed, Shauna recalls the first time she met Ginsburg was a prearranged introduction at the court that turned out to be just a few days after the justice had a stent put in her heart to correct a blockage.
We asked how she was doing and what we could tell her followers, and she said, "Tell them I'll be back doing push-ups in a few days."
But what surprised Konishnik and Carmon most was Ginsburg's daring do. Her parasailing, her water skiing, and her whitewater rafting well into her 60s and 70s. Carmon tells the story of a rafting trip when a Ginsburg friend tried to persuade the diminutive justice to move from the front of the raft to the back because he feared she would be swept away in the unprotected front seat. RBG's response: "I don't sit in the back." Irene Carmon.
One thing that we learned while we were writing the book was that she's been underestimated her whole life.
Some thought her not radical enough, not liberal enough, too female, too much a mother. Some called her dull, her writing not intellectual enough, according to Carmon.
She's proven all of those myths wrong. So I think a lot of young women know what it's like to be underestimated in that way, and they're inspired by the fact that she has so much integrity in who she is. The first Ruth Bader Ginsburg meme that I ever saw was on Election Day in 2012. It was a portrait of her that said, Ruth Bader Ginsburg did not have cancer twice and never missed a day on the bench, so you could stay home and not vote.
On a lighter note, the book includes a section called RBG's Swag about the judicial collar she wears on the bench. A black beaded number is reserved for dissents. The authors note as well that Ginsburg often wears lacy gloves in public, but they admit they didn't know the reason. To be sure, it's fashion, but also to hide the permanent bruises on her hands from her chemotherapy years ago. The book even contains new juicy lyrics modeled after Biggie's lyrics, but these are written for RBG.
Yeah, this song is dedicated to all the judges that told me I never amount to nothing because of my gender, to all the people that lived in their ivory towers that I was hustling in front of.
And finally, there is the How to Be Like RBG section. Things like, think about what you want, then do the work, but then enjoy what makes you happy. As the young authors put it succinctly, RBG gets out a lot.
Damn right I'm gonna speak my mind, cause if we can't move ahead then we're behind, and it's all. And if you don't know, now you know, Nino.
Nina Totenberg, NPR News, Washington.
And speaking of notorious, what's it like when your Jeopardy answer, well, actually your question, goes viral? One of our colleagues found out firsthand. All Things Considered producer Becky Sullivan reached Final Jeopardy and heard Alex Trebek read this.
Take a look. The flower pictured here is called this, also a disparaging term for people on the political left. 30 seconds, good luck.
The right answer was bleeding heart. Here's Becky.
Look, I gotta admit I didn't know that bleeding hearts were flowers. I wanted to at least guess though, so I wrote down the only flower I could think of that was also a quote disparaging term, a pansy.
Becky, we're going to start with you, and I have a feeling that you may have found a way to insult liberals in this country.
It was a surprise to me that Trebek can see the answers before they're revealed, and a bigger surprise that he set up my guess like a joke.
What is a pansy?
Yep. Now that has more than 1 million views on Facebook, 600,000 on YouTube. It's been on the Reddit front page, BuzzFeed, my hometown newspaper, the Kansas City Star. This is not exactly what I had in mind when I went on Jeopardy, seeing my name and face all over with thousands of strangers commenting and speculating about my intentions. I would have gotten second place no matter what. I was too far behind the winner to catch up. But second place on Jeopardy still gets you $2,000.
That's our All Things Considered producer, Becky Sullivan.
You're listening to All Things Considered on WNYC in New York. Tonight, clear skies with a low around 45 degrees, chilly this evening. Currently, it is 53 degrees under clear skies. Tomorrow, Tuesday, mostly sunny with a high near 59 degrees. Wednesday, it will rain all day starting at 10 a.m. with highs in the mid-60s. Looking ahead to Thursday, clear again with highs in the 60s.
I'm John Schaefer, the host of Soundcheck, and the show that I can't live without is Radiolab. Just listen to the texture of that show, the amount of work they put into it. Unbelievable.
What's the one show you couldn't do without? The one thing WNYC couldn't do without is you. Become a member today. Go to WNYC.org and click on donate. And thanks.
WNYC receives support from Blue School, an independent school located in downtown Manhattan where curriculum is designed to promote discovery, investigation, and creativity. Now accepting applications for 2-year-olds through middle school. Open house info and more at blueschool.org.
This is All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Ari Shapiro.
And I'm Robert Siegel. The refugee crisis in Europe has not surprisingly become an issue influencing voters. Poland is the latest example. The country held parliamentary elections yesterday, and a nationalist opposition party is the big winner. It appears that the Law and Justice Party will have the absolute majority, the first time that's happened since the end of communism in Poland in 1989. To talk about the implications of this election, we're joined now by the Wall Street Journal's Martin Sobczyk in Warsaw. Welcome to the program.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And this election is being called historic. Why?
It is historic because for the first time, a single political party won more than half of seats in the lower house of Polish parliament. And also, and perhaps even more importantly, it happened at a very sensitive time in Europe's history, really, when it's faced with the migrant crisis, the Russia-Ukraine crisis in the East, and the Law and Justice Party comes in with very feisty language, sometimes very politically incorrect language, and the change is happening at an extremely important time.
If the next government is going to be a very anti-migrant government, and one of its most important leaders said last week that migrants carry dangerous diseases into Poland for the first time in years, what does that say about the likely relations between Poland and the rest of the European Union, or Poland and Germany for that matter?
Well, the relationship between Poland and Germany will probably be more shaky, considering that the Law and Justice Party is quite outspoken, and that relationship will be a little rougher than before.
The Law and Justice Party that won the election so handily is often described as a far-right party. It seems to be a very complex mix of different kinds of positions.
It's a huge mix from socialism to Tea Party style conservatism. So it's borrowed from all these various ideologies. They want higher pensions and childcare benefits. They want all the elements that a typical European socialist party would want. And on the other hand, it's very conservative in its worldview and ethical questions against same-sex civil unions.